Welcome everyone to Module 3, and this presentation is on valuing commercial properties. Today we will explore the essential concepts and techniques required to value a commercial property. This will include both income producing and vacant properties. Let's get started. In this module, we will cover various aspects of commercial property valuation. We'll start with the calculation of yields for income producing properties, and then we will discuss how to value vacant properties using estimated rental value, or ERV, along with the comparable method. Finally, we'll go through practical examples that demonstrate these concepts in action. To kick things off, let's look at calculating the yield for an income-producing retail property. In this scenario, we have a retail unit that extends to 8,000 square foot. The property next door recently sold, generating an annual rent of £100,000 a year. This was sold at 8% yield. We'll use this comparable information to assess the yield for our subject property, which generates a higher £150,000 per annum rent. So understanding the yield of a comparable property is crucial. In this case, the comparable property has a strong tenant covenant due to its long lease with a major retail chain. The 8% yield reflects the lower risk associated with this property. A strong tenant and a longer lease generally justifies a lower yield since they reduce the chance of vacancy and non-payment. Now, let's apply a yield from the comparable property to our subject property. Even though our property generates a higher rent by £50,000 per annum, the yield cannot be directly transferred. We have to consider the shorter lease length on the subject property of just 2 years and the weaker tenant covenant strength associated with this barbershop. These factors suggest that we should expect a high yield for our property, and based on market conditions and taking into account the considerations, we estimate it to be around 10%. To estimate the market value of the subject property, we can use the formula, which is market value equals your rent divided by the yield. Following this, we must deduct our purchaser's costs. When we undertake this calculation, we find that the market value is £1.5 million, and this calculation helps us understand what the property is worth based on its income generating potential. Next, we must consider the purchaser's costs. These purchase costs include the stamp duty that the investor must pay, the legal fees also paid by the investor, and sometimes the surveyor's fees or agency fees. For this example, we have assumed that those fees amount to 6.5%. By applying this to the market value, we arrive at a net purchase price of approximately 1.4 million. This adjustment is vital in understanding the true cost to us as the investor of acquiring this property. In conclusion, our estimated market value for the subject property, after making our adjustments for the shorter lease length and the tenant covenant strength, is £1,408,450. This price is reflective of the associated risks with the investment and is notably higher on a per square foot basis compared to the comparable property next door. Now, let's shift our focus to valuing vacant properties. Valuing these can be a bit more complex since there is no current rental income stream to capitalise with a yield. Instead, we rely on the estimated rental value, or ERV, and the comparable method to gauge the potential income and market value of the property. The ERV is a critical metric representing the rent that a property could realistically achieve in the market. We establish this rent by looking at the local area and speaking to local agents to understand what the rental income for the property could be. This involves thorough market research, understanding the property characteristics, and analysing the trends. So to value a vacant property using ERV, we follow a systematic approach. First, we determine the ERV. Then we calculate the potential gross income. We estimate the yield based on market data, and finally calculate the market value using these figures. So let's look at a practical example. In this case, we have a vacant commercial property with an ERV of £80,000 per annum and a capitalisation yield of 7%. This leads us to calculate a gross market value of approximately £1.1 million. However, since the property is vacant, we must make an adjustment to account for potential delays in leasing and the associated risks. In this example, we've applied just a 10% adjustment. This brings the market value down to about £1.02 million. Following this, as before, we must factor in our purchaser's costs. For this acquisition, we've assumed them to be around 5%. There is no agent fee or surveyor fee due, so this covers our commercial stamp duty and our legal fees. After applying this figure to our adjusted market value, we arrive at a net market value of approximately £979,000. This figure is essential for understanding the investment's total costs. To summarise, we've covered how to value both income producing and vacant properties. For income producing properties, we discussed yield calculations and adjustments for risks. For vacant properties, we explored the use of ERV and the comparable method to arrive at an accurate market value. To summarise this section, we've looked at both income producing commercial properties, which includes yields, market value and adjustments, and then we've also looked at vacant properties using an ERV, the comparable method, and making adjustments. Before we finish, here are your next steps. Please review the reading materials in this section. I know they're quite lengthy, but they're very important. This will help you deepen your understanding of the topics we're covering. After that, please do take the quiz to test your knowledge and use the additional tools and resources. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any specific questions. Thank you.